If you're new with us, let me do a brief catching you up on where we've been so that you kind of understand where we're at in the story here. Jesus has just been challenged in a series of challenges that have come from political groups and religious groups, the Herodians and the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the teachers of the law. All of them have come and challenged Jesus in different various forms throughout chapter 11 and chapter 12. And they were trying to shame Jesus so they can take their honor back, debunk Jesus' following, keep people from following Jesus, because he came riding into Jerusalem in this triumphal way, and people are crowning him as the king. Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. All of that's taking place, and so they're trying to debunk his following, debunk his honor, and so they're bringing in these questions to try and get him lowered down a little bit in the minds and in the hearts of people. But every question they bring, Jesus absolutely obliterates them in the court of public opinion. Everyone says, it says that they listened to him gladly, meaning that he won the crowd's approval and he won this honor and shame game. He beats them when it comes to talking about taxes, and he beats them when it comes to talking about and understanding the resurrection and the image of God, and most importantly, he understands what's most important to God, which is to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves, and that you can't do one of these without the other, which is a very shaming thing for these religious elite that come to challenge Jesus. It's very shaming to them because, well, they're not doing a very good job of loving their neighbor, mainly the nations, the people that God has called them to love, and also the least of these. And so we're going to come in touch with another one of the least of these today and see where honor is truly found, okay? But we're going to start in verse 38. So if you're with me, go to verse 38 in chapter 12. It says, as he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogues and places of honor at the banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely." You know, Jesus, he begins this section of Mark, and he's talking about the teachers of the law, and he says, watch out, beware, because they parade around, stealing honor from other people, and they take places of prominence everywhere they go. You know, in this culture, the way that this would work is they would put on these fancy ornate robes that had these long tassels, and these fancy ornate headdresses that had these long tassels. And the more tassels that you had, the more respectable you seemed to be, and the more closely you held God's word and his commands to your heart, right? We talked about Deuteronomy 6, how he says, bind these things on your heart and put them on your body. And so these teachers of the law, they did that. They made these robes and they made these headdresses that showed that they were completely devoted to the law of God everywhere they went. And when they walked through the marketplace, people would just part ways, and they would just bow their head low and almost not look them in the eye as not to disrespect them. And so this was what was taking place. Every time they would do that, and they would steal the honor from just ordinary people. And then they would walk into the synagogue, and they'd go and sit down at these prominent seats up in front of everyone, because every good teacher sat down to teach. And then the crowds would come, and they would gather around the teacher, but they would take the best seat, the place where there would probably be room for the biggest crowds, all of those kinds of things. And they would just make a spectacle of this entire thing. And then at dinner banquets, they would be in the most prominent place. And everything they did was to gain honor. wearing the robe and binding the law of God on their body had nothing to do with the fact that they loved God or that they thought God's law was good. It had everything to do with trying to gain honor and this place of prominence within the culture at large. And the same was true at these banquets. I drew a picture of this for you. This is what a banquet table probably would have looked like, something like this. You can see these seats are numbered. The most prominent place would be the 1. And then on the right side of the 1 would be the 2. And on the left side of the 1 would be the 3. And this is what James and John ultimately asked Jesus for in chapter 10, right? Can I sit on your left and can I sit on your right when you enter into your kingdom? When you get to your place of prominence, can we be right there, right and left, right next to the best seat? And what would happen at these banquets is the whole point was what you were trying to do when you showed up at one of these dinner parties was not just to feed yourself, it was to try and shame the person who was one number ahead of you, so that you could take their place of honor. So the 2 would be talking to the 1 that night, and he would be looking for a way to take his honor and take his seat. And then the 3 would be talking across the table to the 2 to try and take his seat. And then the 4 would be talking to the 5 and the 3, and you see how this is going. And the whole point is to try and steal honor from other people and elevate yourself to a higher place of prominence. This is how people deemed you successful in the first century world, especially religiously. And so this is what these teachers of the law would do. This is how they would play the game. And the only problem is Jesus' kingdom has nothing to do with seats of prominence, of where you elevate yourself over others. Jesus' kingdom is all about taking the lowest seat. Jesus tells a story about this, and he says, don't take the seat of highest prominence when you show up at a banquet, but instead take the lowest seat, because maybe somebody will come and say, oh, you've judged yourself too lowly. You need to come up, and then you'll be honored in front of everyone because you chose to take the seat of least honor. In Jesus' kingdom, he says the seat of least honor is the most honorable place to be. And the most honorable thing you can do is put yourself in that place, elevating others and lowering yourself. And this is so foreign to so much of what we try and do and live out on a daily basis, especially in the marketplace, of where we are striving to try and gain more prominence, more of a name for ourselves, make and get higher and higher levels of honor. But Jesus says that their lengthy prayers mean nothing, because this is how they are. It says, watch out, because all they do, they are so keen on gaining honor for themselves, they even devour widows, which we're going to come back to in just a minute. And so he says, don't buy into their religious practices like lengthy prayers, because they're doing other things that are really truly showing their hearts. He's calling them hypocrites. You know, when I was a kid, my church, I don't know if you grew up in a church like this, or maybe you didn't grow up in church at all, and that's okay too. But in my church, there was this Sunday. I think it was 4 times a year, because we did it on 5th Sundays, that were called Youth Sundays. Anyone ever experienced a Youth Sunday where the music was really bad, the preaching was worse, and communion got spilled all over the church? Okay. So anyway, Youth Sunday was something that we did at our church, and I can remember when I was a youth that they would, my grandma used to call me that. She used to call me a youth. Anyway, I'm just reliving childhood memories right now. But when I was young, I was in middle school, early high school, and our youth minister would come to me, who was planning the service, and he would say, Derek, would you be willing to pray for us during the service? And I would say, sure, what am I praying for? And it would either be communion or offering or closing the service out or something like that. I never got asked to preach, because I wasn't any good at that, apparently. But they did ask me to pray. And so I would get up there and I would pray. And I can remember this vividly, especially from and amongst the adults that were in the room, the sweet elderly ladies. They would come up to me after church and they would say, oh my, I just loved your prayer. You're so good at praying. You have a real gift. And if I'm honest, my relationship with God was pretty non-existent at that point in time in my life. Like, my relationship with God consisted of me showing up to church on Sunday mornings, going to Sunday school, sitting through service, and then going to Wednesday night for two reasons, primarily: to hang out with my friends and try and make a girlfriend, okay? Like, that was why I went to church. I'm just being honest. And I literally can't remember anything that I learned in church as a preteen or a teenager. I can't remember a thing except for how to draw a map of Palestine. I don't know why, but I learned how to draw a map of Palestine. I learned a few songs, okay, but I can't remember one teaching that I heard. But I grew up the son of a pastor, and so I knew what to say when I got on stage. I had people in my house all growing up. We would have dinner with people from church, and the pastor would ask his son, do you mind praying for our dinner tonight? So I know what to do when called upon to pray. I know what to say. I know how to fake it. But there's no honor in that at all. And that seems to be what's happening and what's taking place in this story, or at least what Jesus is pointing out about these teachers of the law, that this is kind of how they are walking through life. They know all the things to say. They know how to make everyone believe that they have some deep relationship with God, but it's really not there. It's really just non-existent. Their hearts are not torn toward Him. They're only turned toward themselves. And it shows by the way in which they try and elevate themselves over everyone else. It's the opposite of honorable. And that seems to be where Jesus is leading us. Is that you can tell that their proofs are just a facade by the way they treat widows, which is the story that Jesus goes into next. He leads us to a widow next in verse 41. So take a look at this. It says in verse 41, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put, and he watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in only 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." This is a fairly famous story or popular story, amongst preachers like myself who want to preach a series on radical generosity. Hallelujah. You know what I mean? So this is one of those things that, like, oftentimes you're going to hear, and that principle definitely applies. Sacrificial giving is definitely a principle that you can apply to this text, but sacrificial giving is not just a mark of generosity, it's a mark of faith. It's a mark of true belief in God. The generosity part of it is just a symptom of a heartfelt faith in God. That's what it is. And so you see that she is willing to give sacrificially, not because she's trying to do the right thing. It's because she trusts God completely with everything. And you have to believe that to live this kind of way requires a true desire to do God's will over your own. to do what he is calling you to do and wants you to do and wants from you. You know, one of my favorite teachers is a lady named Ruth Haley Barton, and she says that indifference is getting to a place where you want nothing more, nothing less, and nothing else than for God's will to be done. So when we become indifferent, we begin to want nothing more, nothing less, and nothing else other than God's will to be done. But that isn't just indifference, that's total surrender. That's true surrender. And that's what this widow is showing. She shows that she is completely surrendered. And that is the moral of this story. Giving sacrificially is a way in which you can show that you're completely surrendered to God, but it isn't the only way. Hear me when I say this. Giving generously, giving sacrificially, absolutely is a way in which you can show that you are completely surrendered to God, but it isn't the only way. But I also, as I studied this, I found this passage to be pretty interesting because it caused me to ask a question that I had never asked before. You know, Jesus, he tells the story of this widow who's full of faith right after he talks about these teachers of the law who are devouring widows. And I think it's the first time I ever realized that these two stories come back to back, where Jesus says something about the teachers of the law devouring widows, and then he tells a story about a widow. And the emphasis that we always put on this woman is how much money does she have and how much money did she give? And I'm sure if you're like me, many of you have assumed it's just because she's poor. But in reality, I think it actually lies with what Jesus says before to the teachers of the law. You see, the teacher of the law, to be a teacher of the law is like saying you're a lawyer or you're an attorney. You know the law better than everyone else. You know how to manipulate it in order to win cases for your clients and those that you're representing. You also know how to use it justly, and you could be a judge or a jury for that same reason. One of the key parts of the legal system at this point in time and history was that women were not allowed to represent themselves in court. Women could not or speak or go into court. So if women weren't allowed to go into this place or go into the courtroom, they had to deal with things still legally like everyone else. They had to ask for help from one of these teachers of the law. They needed an attorney. They needed somebody to represent them. And these teachers of the law, what they would do is they would take advantage of these widows by overcharging them, because they had no other way to try and get their case heard or dealt with. And knowing that many of these widows were left good inheritances by their husbands who had passed on, that the teacher of the law would just take and take and take and take until they couldn't take any more. And these widows wouldn't have anything left to pay their bill. And so then what they would do is they would then start to go to their home and confiscate belongings and things, which is why Jesus talks about devouring widows' houses. Widows in the same time, right? It's important to understand widows were cared for by the community and that they were given 6 days worth of food. So they were given food 6 days of the week, and one day they were not given food. And so it's likely that this lady has a home and she has food to eat 6 days a week, but what is being taken from her is what her husband has left her. It's the things she has to remember him by, the things she has to pass down to her children, the money that she has to do other things other than just live underneath her roof and eat food. And that has been taken to the point that now all she has left is just a couple of cents. And instead of becoming resentful toward God because of the absurd corruption of these teachers of the law who made their living at the temple where she is now giving her money, men who were supposed to uphold God's commands, primarily what it looks like to love God well and love neighbor and take care of the least of these, they're not doing that. But instead of getting bitter, instead of getting frustrated, she goes to that place where they make their living and she gives all she has. Because she says, I completely trust in God with all that I have. Even if those who he has entrusted to care for me aren't going to care for me. He's going to care for me. He's going to take care of me. He's going to provide for me. He's where my hope is found. That's what's the story here. She puts her full trust, her full surrender in who God is and what he can do in her life. So let me ask this question of us today. What is God calling you to hand over to him? What is he calling you to fully surrender in faith and in trust? And it isn't just about money, although there is a good chance that many of you, like most people in our world, have a little bit of a money worship problem. Like our world just worships it. We just think that power is found with it, prestige is found with it, hope is found in it, security is found in it, and we worship it to the point that it's bad and it's unhealthy and it's ungodly. And so there's a good chance that maybe that is part of it, is that you do need to give some of your money away. You do need to hold less tightly to it. But it's not necessarily the thing that you need to surrender to God today. I would say it's not the most important thing that you can surrender to God today. It might be your future. You know, you might have a dream and a desire that you've had for a really, really long time to do something, and for whatever reason, those doors just aren't opening, and you're getting frustrated, but you still keep praying, and you keep going to God, and you keep asking God, God, please make this dream a reality. God, I trust you. God, I believe you can do it. God, you're great. God, you're awesome. And you're saying all those things when you're praying, and then you leave the prayer room, and you walk into the world, and you immediately take control of whatever it is you just asked God to do. And he's saying, do you want me to do it, or do you want to do it? Do you really believe in me, or do you just believe in yourself? Right? Pray like it depends on God. Work like it depends on you. Hallelujah? No. Pray like it depends on God and live like it depends on God. Maybe it's your kids or your grandkids. Maybe you're holding tightly to them because you love them. And God is saying, hey, why don't you just hand them to me? Like Abraham and Isaac, he's saying, hey, do you trust me enough to put them on the altar? And I know the fear that wells up when that's said. I think about it. I can picture the fear that wells up inside of you. I can also see the confusion and fear on the face of a child that's just been handed over and put on the altar. It feels like you're just being this like horrible, horrible caretaker. And that's what the enemy would love for you to believe. But don't for 1 second think that that child is better off in your hands instead of God's hands. Don't you for 1 second believe that that child is better for you to hold on to instead of God to hold on to. And I know that's scary, but that's the tightrope of faith. That's what it looks like to trust God. But also, maybe he's just inviting you to surrender yourself. And maybe he's saying, you know, you're willing to give some money because you have plenty of it. You're willing to give a little bit of time here and there because you like helping others and being helpful. You're willing to give up some comforts because, well, there's a sense of personal devotion that you feel when you do something like that and that other people see in you when you do something like that. But you're not going to give him you. You can't let him strip away this mask that you wear every single day in front of others. You can't let him see it. You can't let him see the real you. You're afraid that if that part of you is gone, that they're not going to love you anymore. Then they're not going to love you when the real you is actually presented to the world. And maybe even a worse fear is that you're afraid God's not going to love you when that mask comes down. Because you know the darkness. You know what you're capable of. Most people have never seen it. And to give him and let him investigate that part of you further, search you in a deeper way, and potentially uncover traumas of your past that lead to those dark actions and symptoms that present themselves on the surface, you're not ready for that. To revisit those places is just going to be too hard and too difficult. You won't give that up. But can I tell you something? Thank you for saying yes. God loves you. He doesn't love the you that everyone else sees. He doesn't love the you that everyone else knows. He loves the you that's judgmental and self-righteous and addicted and broken beyond belief. That's the you that he loves. And that's the you that he died for. And that's the you that he wants you to become comfortable letting him uncover and unpack. Because that's the you he created you to be. But can I be honest, that's a transformational journey. That isn't something that takes place in a second or a snap of a finger. But the way transformation takes place is not by him removing the thorn from your flesh that you're trying so hard to hide from everyone else. That's not how the transformation takes place. It takes place by letting that thorn in your flesh draw you closer to him and understand truly his love for you in that place. The place that he knows more deeply than anyone else and loves you in spite of it. Letting that draw you closer to him. That's where transformation begins to come, because you begin to rest in his love in that really special way that only a child can rest in the love of an unconditional, caring, generous father. Because he shows you that love again and again and again, even on your worst day. And this takes place in our lives when we begin to see and we begin to understand that the truest thing about us is not the sin. The truest thing about you is that you are created in the image of God. And that he loves you so much that even while you were still sinners, he came to die for you. When you begin to understand that truth more deeply than anything else, you can begin to surrender everything else, knowing that you are safe in the Father's arms and in the Father's love. And that's what surrender looks like. But you may need to take some smaller steps. Maybe trusting him with your need for control, or your incessant need for more stuff, adventures, and experiences, or maybe even your finances, as just a step forward toward being able to trust him with everything, with all of you and all that you are. So, what will it be? That's really the question. What is he calling you to lay on the altar? Trusting that he will be gracious and caring over whatever that is. I recently have been wrestling with this question. It just so happens that Jesus decided to preach to me today. And this week, as I was studying this passage, but I've been wrestling with these questions. And I got to be honest with you, man. I have been afraid. I've been afraid to give God everything. I've been afraid to give him all my life because, honestly, I'm afraid that he might take it away. Whatever I give him, I may never get it back. In essence, I've been afraid that he's not actually good. My fear is not enough, it's that God's not good enough. God could be evil. He might take it away if I give it to him. I was afraid because what if his will and his way means I don't get mine? But to completely surrender, I want you to see something. To completely surrender, to have the heart of this widow, you have to realize even when others might have hurt you, have taken advantage of you, have taken things from you for their benefit and for their honor, God is too good to you to do that. He is good. And you can trust in his goodness. But you won't be able to surrender until that truth hits somewhere deep inside. Until you can trust his goodness and that he is altogether good. You will always be afraid to give him whatever he asks. But when you realize that he is good and altogether good, and whatever he is going to do, whether he takes it from you or not, if he does take it from you, it is for your good. Because he is good. And he is not going to turn away a child who's trusted him with everything. He's going to be good to that child. He will not destroy whatever it is. He's not going to hurt it. He's not going to handle it with neglect. He will take it and he will make it better. Better than you ever could. And better than you could ever imagine. And that is true about everything in your life, from money to your children, to yourself. Doesn't matter what it is. If you'll give it to him, fully, truly trusting that he is good, he'll make it better than you could ever imagine. Because he is good. So let me ask you, do you trust him? Do you believe that he is good? Then I pray and hope that you will join me in trying to give it all up. Surrender whatever it is that he asks us to give.